What are the most embarrassing crimes celebrities have been arrested for?
Hi. The crime Matthew McConaughey committed is pretty normal, but how the police officers who arrested him found him is both embarrassing and hilarious. On the night of October 25, 1999, his neighbors called the police at 3 a.m. complaining about loud music coming from his house. As the officers got near his property, they must have smelled the marijuana he was smoking and decided to barge in and arrest him. Once they barged in, they found Matthew, who was already famous at the time, completely naked, and high as a kite while playing the bongos. Matthew, who described that night as a jam session, explained how the arrest went down, in his memoir entitled Green Lights. What I didn't know was that while I was banging away in my bliss, 2 Austin policemen also thought it was time to barge into my house unannounced, wrestle me to the ground with nightsticks, handcuff me and pin me to the floor. Matthew refused to cover his McConaughey's, and soon he was resisting arrest in the middle of the road with 6 police cars parked in front of his house, and all his neighbors outside their houses looking at what must have been an, all right, sight to see. While in jail, he started doing sing-alongs with the other cellmates, and the charges for marijuana possession and resisting arrest were later dropped, and he simply paid a $50 fine. Of course, this story became the talk of the town and everyone was laughing about it, including the media that couldn't get enough of the weirdness of it all. Austin residents even honored him in a funny way to remember the occasion. 2 days later, bongo naked t-shirts were all over Austin.
I haven't seen anyone mention Martin Lawrence. Check out the section called Arrests, Lawsuits, and Health Problems. In my opinion, the ones a lot of people are mentioning aren't really even crimes. Hugh Grant and Matthew McConaughey might have been arrested, but they shouldn't have been. And people have decided to make it a racial thing with Hugh by calling the prostitute ugly over and over again, which she wasn't, and McConaughey wasn't remotely embarrassed by his arrest. Although Eddie Murphy was certainly embarrassed by his arrest with a transsexual prostitute, so much so that he quit doing publicity altogether for a couple of years, and absolutely hates to be asked about it. But Martin Lawrence was sued for sexual harassment by the romantic co-lead of his TV series, which should surprise all these single women saying they want a Martin and Gina kind of love. He tried to bring a gun onto an airplane, and received 2 years probation, punched a man at a nightclub, and was caught running down the street waving a pistol and scaring the hell out of passing drivers. He has been hospitalized multiple times for exhaustion and dehydration, which are, of course, code words for drug use. I also know 80-year-old Bill Cosby was pretty embarrassed to be arrested for rape, especially after several credible rape allegations against him had hit the statute of limitations. His squeaky clean image is a total joke to anyone who knows anything.
A Norwegian pop/rock artist, L. Jeans, was caught by the cops with 0.3 grams of cannabis, no, that's not a typo, after he and his wife visited Amsterdam. That amount is so small and microscopical, he even forgot it was in his pocket, and was denied by the courts to tour Norway for a year. He almost went bankrupt as a result of this. No one, I repeat no one, would get a severe punishment for this kind of amount, and certainly not be charged with intent to sell to boot. It was just the cops and the courts being assholes and decided to make an example of this due to his celebrity status. This was 20 years ago. I doubt something like that would happen today.
This one was a bit of a shocker when the news first broke. Reese Witherspoon was arrested with her husband in 2013 for disorderly conduct. Her husband, Jim Toth, was pulled over in Atlanta for driving under the influence. His blood alcohol level was recorded at 13%, which is way above Georgia's legal limit of 0.08%. He was arrested for DUI, and officers asked Witherspoon to remain in the car. Unfortunately, she got involved despite the officers repeatedly asking her not to. After stepping outside the car, she said, "Do you know my name? You're about to find out who I am. You're about to be on national news." As it turns out, Witherspoon refused to calm down, and the officers were left with no choice but to arrest her. Eventually, she pleaded no contest to disorderly conduct and paid a fine of $100. Her husband, on the other hand, pled guilty to misdemeanor DUI but served no jail time. Instead, he was ordered to perform 40 hours of community service, attend an alcohol education plan, and pay a $600 fine. Witherspoon later told Jamila Jamil in 2020, It was so embarrassing and dumb. But, you know what? Turns out I breathe air. I bleed the same way. I make dumb decisions. I make great decisions. I'm just a human being. Back in 2001, Winona Ryder shoplifted at the Saks Fifth Avenue store on Wilshire Boulevard and stole merchandise worth $5,560. It had stuff like a cashmere Marc Jacobs sweater worth $760, quite a few Frederick Fekkai hair adornments worth about $600, and several pairs of socks, including a cashmere pair from Donna Karan worth $80. She was found guilty of theft and had served 480 hours of community service. Also ordered to pay a $20,000 fine. I think she got off rather lightly considering the amount the items totaled. I'm sure her celebrity status had much to do with it, and the fact it was the first time she was arrested. You have to wonder why someone with a net worth of $18 million would feel the need to take anything. Maybe it was the high or rush at getting away with a crime, combined with her not-so-obvious prescription drug use. Throughout her acting career, she has been nominated for 2 Academy Awards and 3 Golden Globes, taking home only 1 Golden Globe. It was reported Winona was also caught with 8 prescription drugs, from many different physicians and for 7 out of the 8 drugs. One of those prescriptions, though, was issued in the name of Emily Thompson, an alias. The following drugs were in her possession during her shoplifting arrest: liquid Demerol, liquid diazepam, bicaprofen, Vicodin, Percodan, Valium, morphine sulfate, and Endoset containing oxycodone. Winona was also charged with possession for the Endoset because she had no prescription. This was dropped, however, when a physician stepped forward and admitted he provided the Endoset without a prescription. Her shoplifting spree not only caused her humiliation but labeled her an outcast in Hollywood. At least for a time. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to subscribe and click the like button. When the stories run out, flip the tape over to continue. Adios, amigos.
What culture shock actually surprised you?
I have 2 answers. 1. France. I got there and everyone was skinny. Except, they weren't technically skinny. They were just normal-sized human beings. They weren't obese as they are in the US. I quickly learned why in Paris. Everyone walked everywhere, and not just that, they walked extremely fast. I was stunned. I couldn't keep up. Everyone also wore clothes that fit them. Portions were also much smaller. It's just different. 2. I lived in Subic Bay, Philippines. I went to a birthday party for a Filipino friend and saw a pig on a table. This is the cultural tradition. It is an extremely popular event in their country and the food is called lechon. The country is still developing, so if they slaughter a pig, it means something important is happening. I was only 6 years old at the time. I had trouble eating pork for a while after that. The irony is that Filipino food is amazing. One of the most underappreciated foods in the world.
I moved to the US 4 years ago. Many things surprised me. The following are a few that I can mention off the top of my head. Number 1. Calling other grown adults by their first name. This is considered disrespectful in the African country of Malawi, where I'm from. I believe it's also considered rude in other African countries. It's a higher form of rudeness if the person you're addressing is older than you. Number 2. Older people, 70 plus, living alone despite having children or other relations. I found this weird. In my country, when people get older, they move back in with their children/grandchildren or get another distant relative that can help care for them. Number 3. Exorbitant high school graduation ceremonies. In my country, the literacy rate is far less than the US's, but no one takes high school graduations seriously. Completing high school is kind of expected, so no one is too hyped about it. Less than 10% of high schools hold graduation ceremonies, and when they do, no one wears the gown and hat. That attire is only worn at college graduation. Number 4. College sports being a big deal. In my country, college students also have sporting activities, but they're not that big. Of the world's top 10 largest stadiums, 6 are the stadiums of U.S. colleges, with over 100,000 seats each. Many other U.S. colleges have stadiums with 50, 60 or 70,000 seats, making them larger than the national stadiums of many countries. Interesting. Students can get scholarships based on sporting abilities. Weird. And the fact that people who have never been to college before can be such die-hard fans of college sports teams was just hard to wrap my head around. Where I'm from, the only people that support college sports teams are those who went to those colleges.
There is a vending machine for every damn thing in Japan. You will find them almost everywhere. I was super impressed to find a vending machine even for a t-shirt cause I accidentally spilled hot miso soup over my t-shirt in Kyoto, so I needed one pronto and right next to it, lo and behold, was a vending machine for jeans, socks, shirts and even neckties. Trust me, the food too that comes out of them are pretty decent, very less difference in pricing if you buy food from a 7-Eleven, my all-time favorite. Plus, they real fun to use. Arigato vending machines. I heard this a year or 2 years ago, but I actually got to know about it recently. In Nepal, there is an age-old tradition in which a young girl is turned as Kumari goddess. The tradition has been following since the time of Malu dynasty. Due to monarchy at that time, the queen used to select a young child who will be suitable for goddess Kumari based on 32 physical characteristics. Later on, due to changes now, head priest selects the one. The young girl, who will be selected, will have no contact with outer beings except her family. Entire connection with society, studies and outer world cuts down. She was not supposed to talk except to her family. During the celebration of festivals and religious ceremonies, she will be brought outside. The major shock is during her entire time period as goddess Kumari she was not supposed to place her feet on the land. A man carries her whenever needed, or in case a type of chariot, I think so. When my family moved to Beijing in 2002, we were celebrities. It had been fairly recent since China had opened its gates to the Western world, and we were often the first white people the Chinese had ever seen. I was a little blonde girl, which attracted the most attention. Chinese people would walk up and grab handfuls of my hair. They loved my blonde hair and wanted to see if it felt the same as theirs. But I have to say, turning around to see a random Chinese woman running her hands through my hair was something I never got used to. The Kodak camera was in full swing. People lined up to take pictures with my dad and me, specifically. My dad is 6'4" and most had never met a man so big. They wanted a picture with this giant. I was a little 10-year-old blonde girl. They took lots of pictures with me as well. About half of them asked for a photo, the other half just walked up and stood next to me and had their friends snap photos without asking. If I took a photo with one person, a line would form out of nowhere and I'd be stuck taking photos for 15 minutes. It was a bit of a nuisance. We were always seated at the front of a restaurant. We were positioned in windows, on porches, wherever was in the spotlight. They would move other patrons so we got the prime seating. The restaurant owner would say, "Up." And the Chinese people in those seats would pick up their bowls of soup and move to the back of the restaurant without complaint. No one questioned it. The attitude was, a foreigner is eating in your restaurant, of course you would want them to sit at the front. Of course we should move for them. Having us eat there would surely bring more Chinese customers who wanted to ogle at us. Because we were the only foreigners, we stood out a lot, and everyone thought we were rich. Poor women with babies would come and tug at my clothes and follow me down the street, pointing to their babies' hungry mouths and shouting wah, wah, at me. In second grade, I had to learn how to run away from beggar women and refuse to give them money because I had none. I was only 10. Shopping around the Pearl Market, I learned to bargain as hard as I could as nobody gave me a fair price. My parents would give me 100 yuan to spend at the Pearl Market and I would haggle for lots of stuffed animals. I turned into a force to be reckoned with, an aggressive second-grade bargainer. However, the biggest culture shock was getting rid of our American politeness. The Chinese didn't believe in lines. If you try to wait politely for your turn to board the train in Beijing, you'll simply never make it onto the train. We learned to push our way on and crowd the doors quickly. There was no social distance. If you moved your hand on the handrail, the person behind you moved it so it was touching you. You were always being touched. People waiting in line were always directly against you, touching your body, breathing down your neck. I don't believe that in 2 years of living there, we ever got over that particular culture shock. It was always disconcerting. However, the biggest culture shock was moving back to the US after living in China for 2 years. We went from being celebrities, treated like royalty, to being invisible in our own country. Learning how to not be noticed was much more difficult than learning how to be noticed constantly. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to subscribe and click the like button. When the stories run out, flip the tape over to continue. Adios, amigos.
As a doctor or nurse, what was your, oh shoot, this is bad moment?
Today my girlfriend Freya, who is a urologist, came home with this is a first story. And a pretty bad one for the patient. The patient is Bulgarian, and extremely obese. Over 450 pounds. The doctors already knew that he has a tumor on one of his kidneys, but they had also seen that his liver was scathed in some way. They needed to find out what the primary cancer is, and so he needed an MRI scan. Turned out he was too big to go into the machine, which was a very first. Then a number of problems occurred when, as an alternative to the MRI, he needed to undergo a PET scan biopsy, and again his immense body obstructed the entire process. And now another problem has arisen. Even if the kidney tumor is the primary cancer, Freya does not see how to operate on a man this big a size. There is so much fat in this man, and so much weight, that be it through an open surgery or a robot-assisted operation, Freya does both. She sees immense problems which might be almost impossible to overcome. So now the Bulgarian might have to move to an academic hospital where they are used to special cases, think house and the like. Freya has said it time and again, that very obese people do not understand, besides the direct danger they are in, how difficult it is to perform medical procedures on these patients, let alone when every minute counts. And that is bad, but also very sad.
I was taking a history on an elderly lady one evening on my med surgery unit. She had just arrived through the ER with her anxious middle-aged daughter in tow. Mom was pleasant and cooperative, with mild cognitive loss. She had arrived in the US the previous day, and started complaining of dizziness, headache, and intermittent abdominal pain this morning while having coffee. Her blood pressure was high, 180 over 120. Not good. Aside from this, she was in no distress during our conversation, per her own report. This was back in the day when medical records were not electronic. So we had no history, no current med list, and no contact information for our patients' physicians back home in the UK. The daughter had no clue either, as up until that time, 80-year-old mom had been managing everything on her own. I did the best I could to drag the history out of the two of them, but it was slow going, with a lot of back and forth about dates, providers, diagnoses. And in the haste to get mom to the ER, the daughter hadn't thought to bring the pill bottles the patient had packed in her suitcase. All the patient could tell me was that she was pretty sure she had forgotten to take the big red pill that she usually took with breakfast. Sigh. We moved on to the physical assessment, which was unremarkable except for 2 old parallel scars on the patient's abdomen. These roughly 8-inch scars ran up and down, not from side to side, and so were likely not from cesarean sections. When I asked the ladies, they were in consensus that these scars were from twin hernia surgeries decades ago. Huh. Unusual, but okay, whatever. I went to phone the cardiologist to fill him in, as he was due on the unit within the hour. He was munching on a Subway sandwich and sipping through a straw while we were talking. He wanted 4 access and wanted me to let him know as soon as the lab results and XR abdomen were available, because he would be flying blind without those diagnostics. Just then the daughter of the patient came up behind me at the nurse's station and tapped my shoulder and said in a loud, cheery tone, "So sorry to bother, nurse. I wanted to let you know that Mom and I just remembered that those long scars on her tummy aren't from hernia surgery, they're from aneurysm surgery." And then she scampered back down the hall toward Mom's room with body language that clearly communicated pride in a job well done. In the meantime, Doc was choking and sputtering in my ear, having swallowed wrong, and swore a blue streak once he was able to catch his breath. "Did you hear that?" he yelped. "Aneurysm, not hernia." Oh yeah, you think this is gonna change the treatment plan just a teensy bit? All other things being equal, a patient with a history of aneurysm will always have an increased risk of another compared to the general population, as a weakness in the wall of a blood vessel might be a one-off, but it might not. In the case of Our Lady, it turned out to be not. But Doc was able to catch it prior to her abdomen entirely filling with blood later that day, and she went back to leading the good life, only in permanent residence at daughter's home and with same now in possession of a new and legally valid power of attorney for healthcare. Trauma surgeon here. We got a few patients from a high-speed NVA. All of them were in varying amounts of pain, and one patient was in C-spine protection. Fire said that she had been unconscious when they arrived on scene, and she only woke up about 5 minutes into the drive to the hospital. She was kind of confused why she was in a neck brace at first, but once the situation was explained to her, she rolled with it and then just asked for some pain medication. No problemo. So, we sent her to CT, and I move on to a different patient. Now, right here, it is important to explain something. At my hospital, we have iPhones running a secure program called Tiger, so we can call/text/leave messages for each other directly, without having to use the PA system/call the floor. That being said, you still routinely get calls on the floor phone for things like report, test results, etc. Pretty much anything that they want to make sure you see ASAP because it may change your care plan, and for something like this, I would expect to have them send me a text saying that the CT scan was ready and to call extension 4X if additional details are requested, along with a file of the imaging and the radiologist's report. This also generally takes 1 to 2 hours. About 20 minutes after I send her to CT, I simultaneously get paged over the PA, I get called on the floor, I get a call on my personal cell phone, and I get a call and text on my personal cell phone, and I get the following text message from the radiologist on Tiger. You're gonna want to see this. CT. Room 3A. No file. No radiologist's report. Okay, so I now can safely assume some shit is going down in CT3A. I excuse myself from my very confused second patient, but when I tell her it's an emergency, she is very understanding that her appendix will have to wait. So I literally run to and down the stairs to the basement, get to the room, and my patient is now in 4-point restraints. Heavily sedated. Not gonna lie, I assume she swung on the radiologist/radiotech, as there are very limited times you can put someone in restraints. Oh, and 4-point restraints? If you put those suckers on in any other situation than the tiny, minute, nearly non-existent sliver of situations where it's allowed, you can literally go to jail. Oddly enough, she doesn't look upset. Yes, she's flying high on the verse that the radiologist ordered, but she's like strangely calm. So, one thing you never want to see on a CT/X-ray of the spine is black where 2 vertebrae are supposed to be shown beaming bright white like a Jamaican beach. You especially never want to see that space between 2 cervical vertebrae. Why? Because when you find that 2 cervical vertebrae are no longer touching, your patient is either dead, brain dead, about to be both of the above. What your patient is not supposed to be is awake and talking. Well, my patient was awake, talking, internally decapitated, heavily sedated and restrained because my radiologist was willing to risk going to jail because he recognized that if she moved even a fraction of a centimeter she could, and most likely would, end up paralyzed or dead. Luckily, we are a level 1 trauma hospital, so, radiologist and I started making some frantic phone calls, where at some point in nearly every call we would end up saying something along the lines of "I'm not joking," or "Why would I joke about this?" etc. So, eventually we, at a snail's pace on purpose, move her from CT to the OR, and a team of a half dozen of us open her up and miraculously put her spine back together. She survived with no lasting paralysis. When we were scrubbing out and the weight of what happened finally hit us, the older of the 2 neurologists was kind of absently looking at the body bag in the corner. He was just pondering that, which we never had to open nor use, thank the stars, and just matter-of-factly said what we had all been feeling. I really thought that was going to be a Humpty Dumpty. One of the surgical nurses asked what a Humpty Dumpty was, and I and the ortho answered her in unison. And all the king's horses, and all the king's men, couldn't put Humpty together again. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to subscribe and click the like button. When the stories run out, flip the tape over to continue. Adios, amigos.
What was something surprising and sad you had to experience?
After my husband passed away from cancer in 2017, I was cleaning out his office space and I found a letter from his cancer doctor. In surgery again to unblock his bile duct. And they did that. Still, my husband never said anything to me about terminal cancer and having 4 to 6 months to live. He passed away on May 26, 2017. I believe he was in denial of dying. And also, he didn't want me or the kids spending the last 6 months of his life crying and being sad. He took the kids skiing in Colorado in January of 2017. Him and I took a trip to Miami in February of 2017. I think he knew deep down he was going to die. But accepted